Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to talk about Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. A few months back I did a top 5 video of epic fantasies to look out for once Game of Thrones actually concluded its run. I'll be sure to post a video in the above the screen here. And Dark Crystal was one of those shows that actually made my list, along with the Chronicles of Narnia and the Witcher series actually coming up. And while it was actually on the list, I only came upon this by chance. And one of the first things I wanted to touch on is why aren't enough people actually talking about this? And Netflix is partly to blame. I mean, while they've been spending a lot of their budget on creating new content and acquisitions, it's a bit important to ensure that people know when these new contents are actually being released. Right now, whether they felt they didn't feel as though they had a big hit on their hands, I guess is another question. But I watched the very first episode and I was hooked, and I binged it, continued to watching because it was just fantastic. Um, I After watching it, I learned that okay, there was an original film that I don't recall. I may have seen, or I didn't. Either I didn't see it or I saw it and I completely forgot about it. But it was refreshing. It was refreshing, and I mean there is a making of video at the end of the season that I would encourage everyone to actually watch. So I won't get into the puppetry and all the mechanics that went into filming this show, but um, it, it was just refreshing to see that original take, using an old style of animation in puppetry, and combining it with modern day CG to actually create Dark Crystal. And the process in and of itself was just fantastic to watch, to see the all the persons involved, both in front and behind the screen, and it was just phenomenal. For those of you who aren't familiar, Dark Crystal, it follows three Gelfins, who are the beings that live on Thra, on a essentially an epic adventure where they discovered a dark secret about the current rulers of Thra, and they're being hunted for it, and they spark a rebellion and go on this epic adventure to try to figure out how to save the world from the Skeksis. Um, and with that, I again I've not I've not encountered a fantasy much like this, with no attachments to um, I don't know, perhaps it's because of where it's coming from. A time that's long been forgotten for the most part. I mean, unless you watch Sesame Street, you don't see content with puppetry very much or often anymore. It's just not as popular anymore. And with the advances in technology, and CG has become so prevalent that we forget that things like this actually exist. But from the music, the writing, the humor, the epic tale that the Gelflings had to actually go on. It was just a fantastic ride. And one of the interesting things about this, and what I love, is that um, the cast that's actually attached to the voice cast that's actually attached to this series is just vast. It's phenomenal. And actually I had to make a list because there are a lot of characters in this, and I it's hard to keep up with all the characters, but a lot of characters in this and a lot of voice actors. Some you know, some if you don't know, you will know from watching this. But Taron Egerton, Mark Hamill, Anya Taylor Joy, Natalie Manuel from Game of Thrones, Mithande, Helen Bonham Carter, who I can't not seeing her being in something like this, right? Um, she's just the queen of the quirky and weird properties, and I went into this expecting to see her name in the cast list, right? Alicia Vikander, Annie Samberg, Keegan Michael Key, Michael Strong, Simon Pegg. So this is this is one of the most phenomenal casting that I've seen in one project, in a very long time. And it was just epic. That's the only word I can use to describe it. It was just epic. But it follows our three main characters, Rian, Brea, and Deet, who are Gelflings who live in Thra. And the premise of the story is that the Skeksis, who are otherworldly, they're not from Thra. They came here, and the Algra, who is essentially, I'm not quite sure how to place, not queen per se, but she essentially the physical manifestation of Thra to some extent. But she's still a creature of Thra, and in some ways the Skeksis kind of manipulated her in that they tempted her with stories of the stars from which they came, and what epic, what lies beyond in the unknown, right? And then they essentially convinced her that she could leave the well-being of Thra to them, and leave the Dark Crystal, which is in a sense is the heart of Thra, right? Leave the Dark Crystal in their keeping, and they would care for the crystal, and she would be free to go off and explore the universe. And so she left her body and went to explore the universe, and she left Thra, and of course the Skeksis took advantage of that, and they started to essentially rule with an iron thumb. They took whatever they wanted from the Gelflings and gave nothing. And so Thra, in every being in Thra is connected, right? In some way. And one of the things I love about this show is how they're able to actually share memories, and it just made me think, okay, what if this actually works on Earth? It would be dangerous. Everything that we do here, there are positives and negatives to it, but we just have to focus on the positives, right, to see what good could actually come of it. And because they're able to share memories that they've seen, that is how they were able to discover what the Skeksis were actually scheming, which is to use the power of the crystal to actually draw a life force from the Gelflings to sort of restore themselves, right? Because for the Skeksis, they need to be portrayed as immortal beings, all powerful beings who never die, who never age. To maintain that image, they went to great length, and the furthest is to essentially pollute the crystal, because for their own well-being, for their own mortality, essentially. And they essentially started to take a toll on Thra itself, and the darkening began to happen, which is essentially where there is no balance. The darkness begins to take over, and even creatures who live on Thra begin to turn evil. It's akin to what we see in some ways in the Avatar. Only I don't imagine this came first, so I'm not sure if inspirations were taken from it for the Avatar, but it's essentially to what happens with the spirits. Where there isn't balance, then, because good and bad exists in all of us, and in some ways, so when there's an imbalance, the creatures of Thra begin to turn to the dark side a bit, and they become more volatile and more violent, and we see that happening. So we follow Deet, who and Nathalie Manuel did a fantastic job with the character, but it's also interesting that while I don't think it was the creator's intention, this show does have a lot of political machinations, right? And in that it's a bit reflective of where we are now, our current political climate, right? So there are different. While the Gelflings are all of Thra, there are different races. They're the same race, but they believe they're different. They have different characteristics. Their appearances are different, but but they're all of Thra. And again, it speaks to a lot of what we see happening in the world now. And in part, it's because I'm not sure at the very beginning that rift between the different clans already existed. But I do wonder whether or not, whether the Skeksis had a hand in it, because what happens here is that, um, the Almadra, who's essentially supposedly elected, right, by the leaders of each of the clans, but at the same time, she has certain um, advantages that the other clans just do not. So Deet's clan, for example, they're forced to actually live underground, and people view them as these weird and spooky characters that are to be feared, when they're really not. They're kind and gentle, and they were just forced to live there. And as we found out later on, it didn't belong to them. It belonged to those spider creatures, who I can't remember what they're called, but when the Skeksis came there, they essentially drove those creatures out, and then they gave Deet's clan the underground mines to actually live there, and essentially they sparked the segregation that happened, and so they favored some, didn't favor others, and it started from there. And later on we do find out that the Skeksis were originally the Urkskeks, right? And they essentially they came here as one being, but in an attempt to cleanse themselves using the power of the crystal, they were split, and the good half and the not so great half, they were separated, and so we got the Uru and the Skeksis, who were once one and were separated and split into two. Of course, the show does fall into some some of the typical what you'd expect, a lot of cliche moments where things were, characters, if they had just stopped for a moment and talked, things could have gone drastically differently. And even with the Skeksis and the Uru, if one dies, the other automatically dies, and one would think that this would solve the problem, because we had that scene where the hunter was after Rian, after they had already visited one of the mystics that gave them that told them where the sword was, right? And he was on his deathbed because they managed to injure the hunter. The hunter escaped and took Bria with him. But one would think he would sacrifice himself to save Bria, because if he died, the hunter would die, and they could rescue Bria. And he could have done that because he told the Augur to do the very same thing. Sacrifice is inevitable, right? And she does that later on, and she sacrifices herself to make a deal with the Skeksis, so that the prisoners could actually go free. And so there are moments where you have to suspend belief to truly immerse yourself in the show and in the story that's being told. But I don't hold that against it. I very much enjoyed it. It's these characters, and Taron Egerton did a fantastic job, by the way, playing Rian, who is our lead. I'm not quite sure what's going to become of season 2. Last I read, season 2 hadn't actually been ordered just yet, right? And that is in fact one of the reasons why I did want to do this video, because I wanted to get more people talking about it, wanted to get more people interested in it. Even if you weren't a fan of the original, I do think you will find something to enjoy here. If you're a fan of fantasy, you will absolutely love it. If you're not into fantasy, but just a group of friends going on an adventure, having fun, the constant battle and tug between good and evil, then this is fantastic. Now, one of the underlying factors here, though, is, and I think this will hurt the series a bit in terms of whether or not it gains the popularity that it really should, is that I'm not sure the writers are sure who their target audience is. And I say this because while at face value, for example, it's akin to watching, let me put it this way, it's akin to watching kids, seeing the Sausage Party. I don't know if you remember the Seth Rogen animated film that came out a few years ago. It's akin to kids seeing that poster and saying, "Mommy, Daddy, you need to go. I want to see that." But when you go and watch it, it's a mature film. And don't get me wrong, this doesn't cross the line into like an R-rated or anything like that. It's tough to do that when you're using puppets, but they do get pretty close. And I say this because um, there are scenes that are very suggestive and some that are just blatant and in your face with it. So, for example, we do have scenarios where one of the Skeksis, the scientist, he failed at his duties, so the Emperor decided to punish him, and of course, punishment was him losing an eye. So you do actually see this creature, this cage placed over his head. This creature comes out, and essentially, they do try to cut away, but let's just say if this were more lifelike, it would be so graphic that this wouldn't be for kids. So and don't get me wrong, listen, I grew up watching some pretty horrific stuff as a fan of anime. I watched Vampire Hunter D, um, um, Fist of the North Star, a lot of that stuff that's just bloody and gory. So I mean, you can watch it if you feel as though it's okay for your kids to watch, then it's fine, because they're not graphic with it, but there are a lot of suggestive materials actually there. And there's even one weird scene where one of the Skeksis took an interest in one of the Gelflings who is much younger. So again, there's some suggestive material there. It's to cement the fact that the Skeksis are just creepy as hell, and they are, and there are no limitations to what they will actually do. And the argument could be, to some extent, there was even one scene where I thought that they were just going to eat one of the Skeksis there. I think it was what's her name? That princess that I hate so much. And if you watch the series, then I expect no argument from you here. While I love the Gelflings, they are so very forgiving, right? But Bria's older sister, Celadon is her name, who was next to be the All-Madra, and she saw her mom die before her, She was so, in awe of the Skeksis themselves. And this comes back to what I discussed earlier about, the current political climate, and where we don't question things, right? These are our elected officials and our leaders. So should we or should we not question the decisions that they actually make? And here we saw Celadon, the perfect example of that, because this is what she was born into. This is all that she knew. These were her leaders, and she was raised to never question it. But in the end, her mom, who was the All-Madra, actually questioned it, and even when they cut her mom down, she was still loyal to a fault. And at that moment, I hated her guts. And I hated the fact that Bria forgave her later on. Yes, she's your sister, but it is her fault that your mom essentially got killed. But I mean, again, a large part of the story is togetherness, friendship, and forgiveness. And that's a good lesson to take away from it. So later on, well, back to my point, when she did go to them, when they eventually decided that they were not going to keep up pretenses anymore, and she went to them and asked them to free the prisoners, all the Gelflings that they had who were going to be drained, and their essence drained to preserve the Skeksis. And they flat out told her no, and then they started ripping her clothes off, and I was like, are they going to eat her here? And they didn't, but because there were certain scenes in the show that were, again, eyes being torn out and stuff like that, I was like, okay, will they go there? Are they going to go there? Oh, okay, no, they didn't go there. I mean, whether, again, it doesn't cross the line, but just bear in mind that there are certain scenes that may be a bit suggestive if your kid is too young to actually watch. So I do believe that that's one of the things that may actually hurt the series. It shouldn't, but again, because of the nature of the production style that is used, the people are tempted to think that, okay, this is, it's a complex storyline. It's not just a kids show, but we've over the years we've associated puppets with things like Sesame Street, and back when the original Dark Crystal was released, it was different back then because again, we didn't have all the technological advances that we have now, and so back then we had things like this, like Dark Crystal, and it worked. It worked, but now it's a bit different. So I worry that people either not adults will not pay attention to it because it's puppetry, and persons who will see it as a kids as something that's just for kids wouldn't necessarily recommend it to older persons just at face value. Right, and it's really not. If I had to describe the series as a whole, I'd say it's something that you can actually sit down and watch together with your kids, right? So it's not for any one demographic. It doesn't skew younger or older. It walks the line finely enough that it's something that both could actually watch, and so it's something that you could sit down with your kid and watch, and you could both have fun with it, and there will be questions asked, but you're there to answer those questions. So Dark Crystal is something that I would definitely recommend, and I don't know, I just want to get more people talking about it. I think it's something that I would want to see a follow-up season 2 or season 3, but we all know how Netflix works. If it doesn't get enough viewership, then we might not see one. But I do hope that having watched the making of video and seeing how passionate these guys are about the series as a whole, the property as a whole, and the originals, because in large part a lot of the cast were fans of the original Dark Crystal when it came out, and that's just that's just fantastic, right? To see that come full circle. And the original creator has for Dark Crystal has since he has passed, but it's just fantastic to see that his work is still revered by so many, that it touched so many persons as kids, and they're working now as adults to ensure that same message gets through to this current generation as well, and doesn't get lost. Right, so again, as I said before, they do a fantastic job combining the puppetry along with modern CG to make the scenery look beautiful. Of course, again, there are some moments where, like in the fight scenes and choreography, there are some moments where you can tell that it's puppetry at work, of course, and so if you're accustomed to seeing perfect CG characters, then it may come across, it may seem a bit jarring for you, but I would suggest, I don't believe that detracts from it in any way. It's a matter of acclimating to what you're seeing now. This is, and accepting that this is the art form that you're watching. It's puppetry, right? And so with that, even with that, it's still phenomenal. The character designs are just fantastic, and it's in a weird way, because a lot of the designs are similar to what was included in the original Dark Crystal, and essentially what they did is in post they actually edited the puppets themselves to make them more emotive. And it's just fantastic to see the two technologies combined, both puppetry and CG animation, to just create this beautiful world, these unique and interesting creatures, and a story that just pulls you in, right? So I absolutely love the characters that were here, the characters, the story, the music was fantastic, and I mean, where the season actually ends, we do have, I mean, it ends with a bit of a cliffhanger for some of the characters. Um, the Skeksis are not all gone. Essentially, they barely managed to take a few of them out, and in most part because of their own greed. And again, it's something that we see ever so often. The Skeksis are, um, they while they pretend to be, you know, like-minded, they're essentially not. Right, and their craving for power often leads to the downfall of one or many of them, and I believe, strongly believe, that that will be what destroys them in the end. But for, I mean, for, we still have our main characters, Rian, and Brea. I'm not quite sure what will happen to Deet. She did something with self-sacrifice there at the end, and absorbing a lot of the dark power that was being used as a weapon. And she absorbed the power from the tree. And I don't know, according to the tree, the darkness can never be destroyed, it can just be transferred. Again, it's about that balance that we spoke about earlier. So she retreated to the forest, I imagine, because she doesn't want to, in some way, be overcome by the darkness and attempt to hurt her friends. So she felt it was best to actually leave. But hopefully in season 2, we can have some resolve there, because the relationship between her and Rian is something that I would want to explore more and see them get back together again. But we'll see. Again, if you've not checked this out, be sure to watch it. Be sure to recommend your friends, family, those who have not seen it. Ensure tell everyone you can. Dark Crystal is a fantastic epic tale that they do need to check out. Alright guys, thanks very much for checking this video out. Be sure to hit like or subscribe. Post down below, let me know what your comments, what your thoughts are about Dark Crystal if you've not seen it, or if you've seen it. Hit like or subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.